Senator Arlen Specter, Republican of Pennsylvania, if you had to pick one or maybe two big influences in your life, what would they be?
The reform of Philadelphia's minor judicial system back in the mid-60s would come immediately to mind, ahead of the single bullet theory, for example, or Judge Bork or Judge Thomas. The Armed Career Criminal Bill, which I worked on, got passed in '84, bringing the federal government into the fight against street crime. I think those would be the two I would pick out. Perhaps some of the work I did as district attorney on work against rape and providing for a more appropriate treatment of victims of rape cases who had been pretty much shunted aside back in the days in the early '60s when I was an assistant DA.
If you had to pick a person or two that really influenced you in your life, who would you pick?
Chief Justice Warren was a very profound influence, chairman of the Warren Commission, where I worked as one of the young lawyers. My father, my mother, sister, brother, other sister.
Mother and father, what kind of impact? What specifically do you remember about them? Are they alive?
Well, my parents are not alive, unfortunately, but my father was an immigrant who came to the United States from Russia in 1911. And he couldn't speak any English, and he had a very, very tough life. He used to say schwer te machen leben, which is Yiddish for hard to make a living. He was a doughboy. He rose to the rank of buck private in World War I, went to make the world safe for democracy, came back to the United States with shrapnel in his legs, learned to speak English by selling blankets and dry goods to the farmers in the Midwest, left Philadelphia, went to St. Joe, Missouri, where he met my mother, who had come with her family at the age of 5. My parents had very little formal education. My mother went to the 8th grade. My father had none. But they were very educated people. My father read avidly and was determined that his children, my two sisters, my brother, and I would have an excellent education.
Why did your father come from Russia in the first place?
Because he didn't like being under the Tsar's heel, because an older brother had been conscripted to go to the army and fight in Siberia, because there was rampant anti-Semitism, because the Cossacks rode down the street, destroying everybody who came in their wake. It was a very oppressive society, and he heard about the wonders of America, came here, and he was right.
Did you sit around at the dinner table and talk about these things?
Yes. Yes, we did. Sat around, talked about them when I would go with him when I was 5 years old, selling cantaloupes. One of my earliest recollections is my father would get up before dawn and go down to the market in Wichita, Kansas, take the back seat out of his car, load it up with cantaloupes. If they were this size, you sold 3 for a quarter. If they were this size, you sold 6 for a quarter. And we would take a basket of cantaloupes, and I did that starting at the age of 5. And we would go door to door selling cantaloupes until the local merchants complained to the constable, because the local merchants wanted to sell their cantaloupes in their stores, and we'd get run out of town. Then we'd go to the neighboring town and sell cantaloupes.
Were you born in Russell, Kansas?
Born in Wichita.
But you spent time in Russell.
Right.
Because Senator Dole's from there, and there are others. Isn't there somebody else that, I remember interviewing somebody recently.
There are a lot of people from Russell. Russell has 4,998 people. They used to have 5,000 until Dole and I left town. But I moved to Russell when I was 12. My father and mother and our family had lived in Wichita, where I was born, until my father opened a junkyard in Russell, Kansas, and I moved there to finish the 8th grade and go to high school. So I consider myself from Russell. Did
you grow up speaking more than one language?
No.
Did your father try to teach you Russian or Yiddish?
No. Yiddish was spoken in my household a little. My brother, who is 10 years older than I, knows a lot more Yiddish, because my father came to the United States in 1911. Morton was born in 1920, Hilden 21. And there was a lot more Yiddish spoken in the family when my father was just in this country for 9-10 years than he was a decade later when I was born. So I know a little, but no effort made. We really moved to English as fast as my father learned the language.
When did you go to Philadelphia?
1948. Went to Philadelphia because my parents had moved to Philadelphia. My father and mother moved back because my sister was of marriageable age. And there was only one a Jewish boy in Russell, Kansas. That was me. So not an appropriate prospect, and my parents moved back to Philadelphia in 1948. And in those days, it was thought a good idea to go to school if you could live at home. My sons went to colleges locally, my older boy to Haverford, my younger son to Penn, and they lived on campus. But I moved to Philadelphia so that I could live at home and go to college, and commuted.
Did your father or your family suffer any anti-Semitism in Kansas?
Yes.
Did you ever talk about that? And if you did, what were the things you thought about them?
We suffered anti-Semitism because there's a lot of it around, and some of it bubbles over the top. There's a tremendous amount of bigotry in this country today. David Duke, anti-feelings about blacks, anti-feelings about Jews, Hispanics, even Catholics. There's a lot of bigotry in this country, and we saw some of it in Kansas. I think perhaps less in Kansas, where there were fewer Jews. But fistfights as a teenager, religious slurs. I participate in a Bible class in the Senate. In fact, I participate in two. One of them is in my office, an Old Testament class taught by a very distinguished biblical scholar, Mrs. Naomi Rosenblatt, whom I knew from law school days. Her husband was there. But every Wednesday morning at 8 o'clock, there is a Senate prayer meeting. And when I took my first turn at delivering the message, I went to parts of the Bible, the New Testament, which were critical of Jews for killing Jesus Christ, for example. And interestingly, some of my colleagues in the Senate were very surprised to hear that those Bible references were activating factors in causing anti-Semitism, which they were. And that's the sort of thing which I saw as a youngster, and still see some when I travel around and have open house town meetings in Pennsylvania today, frankly.
I want to go back to that, but your Bible get-togethers in the Senate, is that right? Something that many senators participate in?
We have regular senators who come, and we have had many who have come occasionally. Of course, it's a busy place, but I would say 15, perhaps 20 senators have come in the course of the past 7, 8 years since it's been going on a weekly basis.
Both parties?
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
What's the goal?
To study the Old Testament and to see how life hasn't changed a whole lot in 5,000 years, and to see some of the lessons from the Old Testament being applicable to the problems which we face in Washington, face in the country today. And it's also a reflective time. We don't have much time to think around here, or perhaps we have time and don't use it, but that's an occasion where we sit down, telephones are all turned off, the only thing that interrupts us would be a vote, and read the Old Testament and have a discussion.
I guess I can't help but want to ask you, if you find yourself in that room talking about the Bible with people that you are not mortal enemies with here, but political enemies with here, and if that's true, what happens, or what are your thoughts?
Well, in the Senate, we really don't have not only not mortal enemies, but not political enemies. We have lots of disagreements, and there are some heated moments, but it's a very small group when you have 100 people, and we have a lot of associations on committees, or when we vote, or for example, we have back-to-back votes. People don't understand we vote, and then 15 minutes later we have another vote, and 15 minutes after that we might have 3 back-to-back-to-back, and it's not enough time to go back to your office. There's a lot of time to talk and to get to know people. I know every one of the 99 senators. I could give you their names state by state and the people, and a fair amount about them. So this business about enemies, I mean, there are a few, there are some very sharp disagreements among some members, but relatively few. But to answer your question from a slightly different perspective, we've had some very fascinating discussions by one of the senators who believes the word of the Bible actually word for word. And one day another senator questioned how he could believe that, and it was quite a confrontation of two mature men coming to disagreement about a very fundamental point, and that is whether the Bible was literally exact in what it said when it portrayed one of the miracles of the Bible, for example, the parting of the Red Sea. I won't say which side I took.
Bigotry, is it white Christian Gentiles against everybody else, the bigotry you're seeing, or is it?
No, there's a lot of bigotry within the category you just mentioned, white Christian Gentiles. There's a lot of bigotry that runs back and forth there. I think there's more which runs in America from on racist lines against African Americans, against blacks, against Hispanics, against Orientals, against Jews, and against Catholics. But there's hardly a group that hasn't been the victims of discrimination. It's not reserved for any one group.
Got any clue as to why this thing goes on? What's the source?
Why does it go on? Yeah, I've got some clues.
Help us better understand it?
Well, I think it goes on because you have a wave of competition. You have the Irish coming to America, and you have Justice Souter testifying in his hearings about, or one of the witnesses who testified for Justice Souter about Irish need not apply in Boston. Or you have the wave of Jews coming to the country, and a lot of people saying that Jews control the media, for example, which, you know, it's all preposterous. Or you have the African American, the blacks moving up in society, and you have very deep divisions right now on job preferences. We just went through a torturous battle on the Civil Rights Bill, a battle that I was very, very deeply involved in. I tried to help work it out so we wouldn't have a quota bill, but would have equality of opportunity, which you have to have if we're to have people get ahead. But I think if you pick one level, competition, and there are a lot of people who just don't like somebody who has a different viewpoint or a different line of origin. And I don't have to dwell on the tremendous envy that goes on at all levels of our society. So there are a lot of ugly heads. It's an eight-headed monster, if not more.
You mentioned your parents that you admired and Earl Warren. And who was he, for those that aren't that old? Earl
Warren was Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States, Governor of California, Attorney General of California, District Attorney of Alameda County, and before that, a lawyer. And your question is spontaneous and unrehearsed, and Warren comes to mind very, very promptly as a great American, as somebody that I knew personally in the formative days when he was the chairman of the Warren Commission, and I worked for him. And he's a very profound man. I think has had a great impact on America. Don't agree with a lot of his ideas, fought with him furiously, for example, when I was district attorney over the Miranda case, for example. But in terms of a man who had a lot of balance and a lot of wisdom, made a great impact on this country.
And what was the Warren Commission?
The Warren Commission was the presidential commission to assassinate the investigation of President Kennedy, formed 7 days after the assassination, and 7 commissioners, and they went out and recruited staff, and they tried to get lawyers from all over the country. They hired lawyers from Des Moines and Chicago and Denver and Philadelphia, and I was one of the lawyers who was hired.
How'd you get hired?
I got hired because I had met Attorney General Robert Kennedy earlier in the year when I had completed the first conviction of Teamsters arising out of the investigation of the McClellan Committee, where Robert Kennedy was the general counsel. Senator Jack Kennedy was on the committee, and Bob Kennedy asked me to join the prosecution team against Hoffa, which I did not want to do and did not do. But then when President Kennedy was assassinated several months later, my connection with Attorney General Kennedy and also my law school friendship with a man named Howard Willens, who was the Justice Department liaison, led to an invitation coming to me to join the staff.
You were a Democrat then?
I was a Democrat then.
Did you grow up being a Democrat?
I did.
Why did you switch parties, and when did you do it?
I switched parties because I wanted to try to bring back a two-party system to the city of Philadelphia, and I did it in December of 1965. The circumstances require expanding upon your questions. I was interested in being district attorney of Philadelphia. Back in 1965, I had been an assistant DA, and I had been a special assistant attorney general investigating the minor judicial officials, and Philadelphia was a very corrupt town. The Attorney General of the United States, Nicholas Katzenbach, had said that in Philadelphia nearly half the people are on the take, and the Democrats would not have anything to do with me. I talked to the chairman of the Democratic Committee, a man named Frank Smith, who said they didn't want, this is very complimentary, but this is what he said, it's in the newspaper, the bulletin of the time, they didn't want a young Tom Dewey. Very complimentary, but that's what happened. And the Republicans offered me the nomination with no strings attached. And I ran on the Republican ticket for district attorney in 1965. I did not change my registration. I was a registered Democrat when I ran for DA. And nobody had won on the Republican ticket for a long time, and I was successful. And after I was successful, I thought that they really needed a two-party system in Philadelphia in 1965, just as they do in 1991. And haven't gotten it yet, but we're still working on it.
How many times have you won an election? Any election?
5 contested elections.
And those were?
I won for DA in 1965 and 1969, and in the tough Senate primary in 1980, and then the general election in 80, and then in 86.
How many times have you lost an election?
I can't remember that.
But there have been quite a few, haven't there?
4.
You lost, what was the hardest one to lose? Did you lose to John Hines once?
Yeah. That was hard, but there were others. All of the losses are hard, but very developmental, very educational.
You ran for governor?
Did.
What year?
1978, May, in a primary.
Is it harder to lose or win?
Well, it's a lot harder to lose because it's a very exposed position for people who haven't put themselves on the line. Offer yourself for candidacy, run on a platform, do a lot of travel. But you learn from them. Given my own background, being a Philadelphian is a very unpopular thing in Pennsylvania politics because of a lot of reasons. And when I lost in the Senate primary to Senator Hines by a narrow vote in 1976, and then lost in a crowded field, finished second in a field of 5 candidates and 78 for governor, 3 coming from my area. It was such that enabled me to build up a following. I don't have a lot of money. I had some base in the Philadelphia media market where I'd been DA, but I was not known throughout the balance of the state. Enabled me to build up a following and a lot of work to set the stage to win a primary in 1980, which led to my election to the Senate in the general election of 1980. So I learned, and I benefited from the losses, but not as much as from the wins.
Let you characterize this year, 1991, but it's been a doozy, wouldn't you say, overall for you and all the things you've been involved in?
It's been a dipsy doozy. It really has. Tough year.
Reflect on it. The death of John Hines, what impact did that have on you?
Well, it had a tremendous impact on me personally because John and I, in many ways, were the two sides of the coin. A relative of mine said that she heard the news reports in Chicago, Pennsylvania Republican senator dies in a plane crash. And she was speculating whether it was me. John and I worked very closely together. I had been with him, Joan, my wife, and I had been with him for a long session in Altoona the day before when we met with a group of people there. And shared a lot. When we finished up in the Senate late at night, John and I lived fairly close to one another in Georgetown. His digs were a little more expansive and expensive than mine, but I would drive him home because I had a car handy. We were very close, so it was a very tough loss for me personally, for the state, and none of us has gotten over it yet.
What about all these hearings? What impact's that on in your life? The obvious one would be the Clarence Thomas and Anita Hill hearings.
Well, it's had a very, very profound impact on my life because it has brought to the surface a lot of feelings which were totally unexpected and totally unpredictable. The Senate and the Judiciary Committee, and those of us who were in the Senate, myself included, didn't handle it very well in terms of how it was handled initially, and a lot of reasons for that. And then we were thrust into the hearings on very short notice. The Senate on a Tuesday postponed a scheduled vote and said to the Judiciary Committee, "You go find out who was telling the truth." And on Wednesday, I was asked to lead the questioning because of the background I've had as a questioner, a lawyer, and had one day to prepare Thursday, and then Friday we're thrown right into the midst of it on a very, very tough job. The Senate's really not equipped in the hearing process to find out who's telling the truth. And then I was really flabbergasted to find at the end of Friday that the networks had carried it all day, and that ABC and NBC had preempted the evening programs, and it finished ahead of CBS, both of them, even though CBS had the World Series on. And then the tremendous feelings that came out of it, something none of us was prepared for. And today, I can understand the very deep sense of hurt in many, many lines. I think many women identified with Anita Hill. And if they didn't identify personally, they identified for their daughters, or if the men identified for their wives or for their daughters. And you've got a lot of sexual harassment in this country. And I think that it's gone undetected, unpunished. And then you had an overlay of the struggle that women have in the workplace. The glass ceiling, which keeps women out of important jobs. And that was very much a part of it. And then you had the picture of 14 men up there on the committee with one woman, sort of overwhelming, and the establishment, and what that meant to women who had come up with harassment claims in the future. And we certainly we were trying to find out what happened. Very difficult to find out what happened between a man and a woman 10 years ago. It's hard to find out what happened 10 days ago or 10 minutes ago, let alone 10 years ago. And I've been very concerned when I hear people say to me that it makes women very apprehensive about bringing claims of sexual harassment because they're very concerned, and understandably so, that what may happen to them is what happened to Professor Hill. So that you really unleashed a torrent. And there's another aspect to the matter, the aspect of one African American, one black man sitting there with 14 white men, and all over 50, or almost all over 50, so that you had the high-tech lynching, which Justice Thomas talked about. So that if you want to find, and I don't think we've begun to understand it all yet, and it's been serious. Some of my best friends very, very angry with me, and the feelings are overpowering, and the feelings cannot be dealt with by the facts. The New York Times said that my questioning of Anita Hill was painfully polite, and even well, some other word about thoughtful. Nina Totenberg, who broke the story, a very strong woman's writer, as is my wife, by the way. But Nina Totenberg said that my questioning was very professional and very appropriate, and that what people were concerned about was its effectiveness. But when you talk about the specifics, and we had a long show on Nightline It's usually a half-hour show, and they elongated it for an hour and a half, and it went, instead of from 11:30 to 12 and then 11:30 to 1, it went from 11:30 to 2:15. And a lot of emotions there. And I said to people, well, it's all on videotape. Take a look at the questions. I'd be glad to look at them with you. But none of the facts deal with the feelings, and it's something I think we're going to have to examine in this country on all those very important substantive questions.
Did you ever get nervous, or do you ever get nervous sitting up there when you're doing your questioning, knowing that so many people are watching?
Sure. But I had no idea that so many people were watching. In the first round of the Bork questioning, and I've never commented about this publicly, nobody's ever asked me, but this is sort of illustrative, I spilled a glass of water right when my turn came on round 1. And Senator Grassley was on my left, and Senator Humphrey was on my right, and they wanted to change seats with me, and I decided the best thing to do was just to ignore it, which I did.
Where'd the water go?
It went all over the table and partly on me and all over my papers, but I thought the best thing to do was to grin and bear it. But no matter how experienced you are, or how many hearings you've been through, there are certain butterflies. I think the pro football players have it, the actors have it. I think it's just a very human factor, and I have it.
When you're sitting up there and you're looking at the witness, and you obviously can see cameras and people in the room, is there some point where it all blocks?
Yeah, after you get started and you start to focus, it blocks. But you're aware that it's there, and you're aware that every little movement is being watched. I was on Tom Snyder's show years ago in the mid-'70s on the single bullet theory, and Snyder had the Tomorrow Show, and he taped it at 11:30, and then he put it on at 1 o'clock. So I did the taping, went back to the hotel, and watched it. And they had the camera zoom in right on my eyes. They wanted to see, when I talked about the single bullet theory, they wanted to see as close as they could what my demeanor was. And that made quite an impression on me in terms of television. So that when you're questioning people, Judge Thomas, Professor Hill, whoever, that camera's there, and it sees everything.
Was there a moment in those hearings that you knew from where you were sitting that it changed something?
No. I was surprised that the public opinion polls came out as they did for Justice Thomas. I had thought they would have been the other way, just as a matter of the emotional impact and the young woman and the whole circumstance. No, there was no moment like that.
What's your reaction when you hear or you read about yourself and they say he's tough, he's difficult, he's not easy to get along with, all those strong things?
Well, I can see how people would say that. I'm very directed, and I think that comes from my experience in terms of the necessity to be directed and the necessity to be strong. I don't like to hear that I'm tough or hard to get along with. I don't think I am hard to get along with. When people say I'm tough, I was known as a tough DA. I think a DA has to be tough. I think if you go through the questions that I ask, generally, if you go through the questions on Bork, they were directed, Judge Bork directed questions. If you go through the questions I asked Judge Thomas before he was Justice Thomas, asked him some very strong questions on affirmative action, pushed him very hard, for example, on why he opposed affirmative action from a high school dropout, trying to get a job, when he had the benefit of preference getting into the Yale Law School. Asked him tough questions, or let me amend that to strong questions, or leave it at tough questions, on why he didn't watch Professor Hill's testimony. You know, one of the other senators asked that question when Justice Thomas said he didn't watch, the senator dropped it. I want to know why he didn't watch it. Seems to me he should have. Or when he went to her apartment, said he didn't socialize. You don't. That's a question that should have been asked. So I asked directed questions. And when I had the job of questioning Professor Hill, there were questions which had to be asked. But I asked those questions. That's a buzzer for anybody who may hear it. Senate is in session as we speak, and there are two buzzers which mean a quorum call. But I was saying when I asked questions of Professor Hill, there were questions which needed to be answered. Why did she move from the Department of Education to EEOC? Telephone calls, you know, the whole works. If you want to find out what happened, the only way you can do it is ask questions. And if there are charges made, you have to ask questions.
Did you, at some point in your education or in your career, learn the technique that you use to ask questions, or is it just come instinctively?
No, it evolves, and there's nothing very complicated about it. One of the things which I think many people do not do when they ask questions is listen to the answer. Tremendous amount. You ought to watch C-SPAN sometime on the Q&As and see how many times people will have the questions written out, they'll ask a question, not listen to the answer. Or when the questioner will ask a question which has many parts so that the witness can pick out any one of 3, 4, 5, or 6 different answers. You have to ask one question. And then if the witness doesn't answer the question, you have to gently come back to the question. And there's a purpose in asking questions. And it's really not all that complicated. And it's hard in the hearing, unlike a courtroom. In a courtroom, you don't have any time limitations. In a hearing, you have 30 minutes. So that a lot of times when you question Justice Souter or Judge Bork or Chief Justice Rehnquist, you got to lay a lot of groundwork and then move to the questions. But ideally, a questioner ought just to ask questions, ought not to make any speeches.
Where'd you go to undergraduate school?
University of Oklahoma. Started there the same year Bud Wilkinson started coaching. Transferred after 1 year to the University of Pennsylvania, where I graduated. Your
degree was in?
Political science, international relations.
You got your law degree where?
Yale.
Can you go back over your life and if you were sitting and reflecting on what you are today, and could you answer the question, I am what I am because of, you mentioned your mother and father and Earl Warren, but what other steps in your career would you finger as being important? People you've met, teachers you've had?
Well, I don't think it's possible to answer that question in the comprehensive way, not only not on a short soundbite, but even on the luxury of the C-SPAN 1-hour interview. But there are things I could particularize. I think I remember, but I'm not sure, but at least I was told that when I was very young, my father was very angry on the Veterans March on Washington. And that's the famous march where General MacArthur was there and Major Eisenhower, and my father felt he was entitled to a bonus. And I've had a very deep interest in veterans affairs ever since, and I've sort of just encapsulated in sort of an inexact way, been on my way to Washington ever since to get my father's bonus. So I think that was a factor. And I always wanted to come as an elected official. When Bobby Kennedy offered me a job on the Hoffa prosecution team, I didn't want to be part of the bureaucracy. And I had a very deep interest in civil rights as a child because of my father's being oppressed by the Tsar and what happened, bigotry in America and the anti-Semitism. So I wanted to be a lawyer to be in a position to protect myself and others. And I've done a lot of work in civil rights. And then I was interested in gaining skills as a lawyer. I did a lot of debating in high school and college. And then I joined a law firm, Barnes, Deckard, Price, Myers, and Rhodes. Now, Deckard, Price, and Rhodes. I will not give the phone number. However, in Philadelphia, I have not had any financial association since I've become a senator. But I didn't like the pace and the absence of the development of legal skills. I became an assistant DA after I'd been there a little over 3 years because I wanted to learn to be a trial lawyer. I think that those were significant factors. And I became a committeeman right out of law school. I went door to door, get people to register. Remember one day going up 4 flights of stairs, 3 flights to the 4th floor to get somebody to register. Went 3 times to get them to register. I registered to the other party after I got them to register. Get people out on election day, was interested in politics. And those are some of the developmental steps before becoming DA, et cetera.
Go back to Earl Warren, if you would, please, again. What was so great about Earl Warren?
Earl Warren had a profound impact on America in bringing his values into play, and on his independence, and on his projection of America on a broad sense of decency. And on the personal level, he was very hard to get along with. I mean, you want to talk to somebody who's tough, you ought to talk to Earl Warren. Earl Warren was a great administrator. We were coming back from Dallas the day that Jack Ruby's deposition was taken, and Earl Warren was going through papers and issuing orders and making directions. We started 6 a.m. and this was past midnight, and Warren was really moving along. We didn't go to Dallas to take testimony until Jack Ruby's trial was finished, because Chief Justice Warren didn't want to interfere with that. And I remember one day he said to me, I want you to go to Dallas and start taking depositions of the doctors who treated the president, Governor Conley. And it was Passover week, and I said, well, Mr. President, I'd like to, okay. He said, when can you go? I said, I can go a week from today. He said, I was hoping you could catch the afternoon plane. I ended up taking my family to Wichita, leaving with my sister, and taking the afternoon plane to Dallas. I was there Wednesday afternoon. You want to talk about somebody tough, I'd like my staff to deal with Chief Justice Warren.
Single bullet theory, I know you've talked a lot about it in your life, but for those who've never heard it, what was it, or what is it?
The single bullet theory is the tracing of the first shot, not the one that subsequent shot which hit the president in the back of the head and killed him, but the first shot which passed through the president's neck, entered between two large strap muscles, hit nothing solid, came out of his throat, nicked his tie was intact, we had the nick available. Bullet had a little yaw on it, that is, some deviation, wasn't pristine, entered the governor's back slightly to the left of his right armpit, grazed a rib, which we knew from the x-rays, tumbled out backwards, left a hole 4 inches in diameter on the governor's chest, and then tumbled through his wrist and lodged in his thigh. And it has been widely criticized, widely doubted, but on all of the intense studies which have been made by writers, correspondence networks, it's been upheld.
How old were you when you worked for the Warren Commission?
I started when I was 33, ended when I was 34.
And after that was over, did you go back to Philadelphia?
I went back to Philadelphia.
How old were you when you ran for DA?
35.
And originally, how old were you when you ran for the Senate?
50.
And are you going to...
46 on the losing track.
Are you going to do this again?
Yes.
Next year?
Yes.
What do you say about the polls that come out that say this institution is not very well respected? And why do you, if you agree with those polls, why do you want to do this? Why do you want to keep this up?
What do I think about the polls? I think the polls are understandable. I do not think we're doing our job. I am very unhappy. This is the last day of the session, allegedly, that we're going out of session. I'm not sure we will go out of session because the Senate adjourns when the last senator stops talking. I think we ought to be in session in December. We ought to face the economic problems facing the country, which are very serious. Why do I want to stay here? Because I think that there's a lot of important work to be done. And it sounds hackneyed and trite, but I think I can make a difference. I think I have on some of the things I've done so far. And I'm gaining knowledge and experience, and there's a lot more to be done. There are a lot of matters that I'm working on in midstream.
What's it going to cost you to run again?
I don't know, but I know that it cost $7.4 million in 1986, and I know that as obscene as that figure is, it's small compared to what they spent in North Carolina or other comparably sized states, Texas, for example.
Is it demeaning to you to raise money?
No.
How do you do it?
Ask for it. Call up people, discuss it. It's not demeaning because it's a part of the system. Presidential nominees, President Bush raised money. President Reagan raised money. It's been a part of our system for a long time. We ought to change it Senator Hollings and I have a proposal which would change the system. There are some really fundamental changes involved, but I'm not wealthy. Anybody can file. I don't want to give too many people ideas, but nothing they don't know already, and spend $10, $15, $20 million of their own money on a campaign, and I do not have that wealth. And if I want to be prepared, I better have money in the bank to give my messages. C-SPAN's the only free network around. When you want to put commercials on, it's very, very expensive. And they can put on 30-second spots. I voted 4,000 times. It's very easy to take spots out of that 4,000 voting record and distort them.
Do you expect to have an opponent in the primary now?
I do.
Did your role in the Thomas hearings help you or hurt you in the primary?
I don't know.
Get any sense of, well, I mean, are the conservatives the one that are going to oppose you?
The far right wing is going to oppose me in the primary, but I don't think that the people who dislike my voting record are going to change because of what I did in Thomas. And the person who I expected to file against me in the primary already announced last week. And every time you please somebody, you displease somebody else. So a lot of people are unhappy with me about my role in Justice Thomas's hearing. So if you say, does it help you or hurt you in the primary? I don't know. You can't figure it out in advance. You can't calculate it as you go along. And after the fact, you really don't know.
67 counties in Pennsylvania?
Yep.
Is it true that you literally went to on 4 different times to each of those counties within the last, and I read it recently, during one of these terms? Did you really visit each of those 4 counties, each of those 67 counties 4 times?
No, I think I did it more.
How and when?
Well,
how do you do this?
I do it on recesses, and I go to the counties because it is very important to stay in touch with the people. I mean, it's genuine. If you stay in Washington, or if you stay in Philadelphia or in Pittsburgh, or in the big cities, you do not really have a sense for what people want. And we can only do so much. Really, the job of government is to establish priorities and take care of the biggest areas of need. And you only find that out as if you go talk to the people. If you go to Potter County, for example, on the northern tier, and talk to the farmers, the small businessmen there. Or if you go to Fulton County on the southern tier. I went to Fulton County, and I walked into the newspaper office, and I identified myself. This is when I ran in 1980. And the editor of a weekly paper said, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "I'm here to campaign." He said, "No, what are you really doing here?" And I said, "I'm here to campaign." He said, "Well," he said, "there are only 12,000 people in this county and only about 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 vote, and you can't affect 25 votes by being here." And I went back several years later and told him the story. He may be watching, but I go there because that's how you find out. And also, people really like it when you come to their county. And not only do you find out, but if you go back in an election year, the first thing people say is, all you do is come here in an election year. But they can't say that to you if you've been there before.
We see you on television and hearings and all that, and you're just telling us that you go to all these counties in the state. Do you have any time for reflection?
Sure.
When?
I have time for reflection when I'm driving over the roads to the counties. If you're driving from Susquehanna County to Bradford County, it's an hour ride. And there's time to read. I get a lot of reading done. If you travel across central Pennsylvania, there's a lot of time to read and think. I'm an avid squash player, for example. Play squash every day, unless it's totally impossible. Played this morning at 7 a.m.
Another senator your opponent?
I have quite a few opponents, but I play with Senator Packwood, Senator Chafee. Senator Warner recently hurt his knee.
Who wins in those squash matches?
I never discuss who wins and who loses, except to say that my standard for winning is playing and surviving, which means I always win.
Go on back to your reflection.
We break even. We're all competitive among Warner, Chafee, Packwood, and myself.
On reflection, if you have time, what would you do if you had free time? All of a sudden, Senator Specter has 2 days to do whatever he wants to do.
I'd go to the seashore and read some books on other subjects.
Like?
Well, I'm reading a book about John F. Kennedy now. It's called The Matter of Character, which is interesting. I recently finished the book of a fellow who was Secretary Clark Clifford. I read that book. I read The Commanders, not quite finished reading The Commanders. I've picked up Catherine Drinker Bill's book on Justice Holmes, rereading that. I've got a book that was given to me on the energy crisis, on oil.
The Daniel Yergin book?
Yeah.
The Prize?
Yeah, The Prize. It's 4 inches thick. It's a fascinating history book, as well as the development of energy. But I read a lot, and I find time to read. I ride the train back and forth, and I'm constantly reading there. There's time to reflect.
How many children?
2.
What do they do? How old are they?
Our older son, Shannon, is 33, practices law in Philadelphia, very successful. Our younger son, Steve, is working on his PhD in nutrition, also very successful.
Where'd you meet your wife?
At a high school dance. I was a sophomore in college, and she was a freshman in high school, and she was a much younger woman then.
How long did you date her before you married her?
3 years and 9 months.
Who got into politics first, you or her?
Both of us together. I ran first.
And she is a city council woman in Philadelphia?
Yes.
Of what party?
Republican Party.
Has she always been a Republican?
No.
Do you two disagree on anything?
Yes. Interesting time when I ran for district attorney. In 1965, I told you earlier I was a registered Democrat, and so was Joan. And the night before, we got a call from a fellow helping us with press, a very able guy named Gene Cowan, who was press secretary for Senator Scott and later vice president of ABC, still a good friend of mine. He said, Arlen, you ought to get over to the polls at 7 o'clock because I think you can get a good picture if you get there early. So we got there at 7 o'clock. John and I looked at each other and said, what are we going to do with the children? Shannon was 7, Steve was 4. So we had no choice. We had to take them. No time to arrange a babysitter, so we got there. And Joan goes into the polling booth. I went in, and I said, Joan, don't vote for any of the Democratic candidates. You're going to be asked, and don't interfere in their primary. But I voted for the judges. Joan voted just on the questions, and she couldn't get out of the polling place. And I didn't know, but if you go into the machine, you can't get out without voting for a candidate, because the machine will not be liberated if you just go in and vote on the questions. And Joan got locked into the polling booth, and we had an hysterical 4-year-old son, Steve Specter. I got the greatest picture on the front page of the paper. So when you ask me, was she a Democrat? Yeah, and she couldn't quite figure out how to vote in the primary of 65.
Your relationship with the constituency through television, do you like what you do with these kind of things? Are you in a confrontational situation in your state always when you sit down with reporters? What do you think of the relationship of the public official to the media?
I think that it is not an easy relationship. I try to be very direct and very factual and very responsive. And I was reading about Mayor Dinkins this week, and somebody commented that it's an adversarial relationship, and I think it is in some quarters. I don't think it is in all quarters. And I've gotten a lot of good press, and I've gotten a fair amount of bad press, and it's part of the process.
How do you get your information every day?
I read the newspapers every day, meticulously, page by page, the Times, the Post, and a number of Pennsylvania papers.
Do you watch much television?
I do. You know, I watch a lot of C-SPAN. I come home at night, and first thing I do is click on television when I sit down and relax a bit.
What's your reaction to when you see yourself there and you look at it from the other side?
Usually don't like it.
Why not?
Don't like the way I look. Don't like the camera angle. Getting older. It's hard to watch yourself on television.
Is it different to watch it from the living room or wherever you watch it than it is to sit up on the dais looking down? I mean, what's the different feelings you have?
Well, the different feeling is that on the dais, as you put it, in a hearing, I'm at work. When I'm at home, I'm watching it. And I don't like the way I stumble, the way I stutter. I don't like some of the questions. I find a lot of things that I've done wrong, but I watch it with a view to learning. We get tapes at the end of the day. I try to play the tapes when I can. I haven't been able to do that for several months now.
I guess the question I wanted to ask was whether or not the audience watching the political process is getting a different view than what it feels like to be there, or is it significantly different?
Oh yeah, I think the audience comes in disjointed parts and they don't follow it, and a lot of the subject matter is very complex, and I'm constantly aware of trying to communicate so people understand, but it's very hard to do. And people draw a lot from it. You take the questioning of Professor Hill. I mean, the emotional impact on that and the feeling level was just so different, so that the viewer takes away a lot, which I, as a participant, don't really understand fully, and sometimes not understand very much at all.
The cycle of politics is often written about. There have been books written about it. Do you think that are we at a low ebb right now in the way people feel about politics, or is this an unusual period?
I think we are, but I think there are recurrent times. I think our society right now has a degree of fragility. I think we had a lot of fragility during the Vietnam War, about distrust of institutions. I think we had a lot of fragility, more so in the Depression days in '32 when Franklin Roosevelt became president. But people are very distrustful, and government has not performed well.
Is there anything you can do as a single senator to change that?
Yeah, absolutely. I had an idea about using IRAs. I took a look at some of the proposals which are in Congress now, where we want to establish new IRAs. We made a mistake in '86 in discontinuing IRAs, but it's coming back to use IRAs for college education, for medical expenses, or first-time home buyers. So the thought occurred to me that why shouldn't we use existing IRAs for consumer goods? And I floated the idea around, and Senator Domenici liked it, and he and I became colleagues on it. We proposed it on the Senate floor. We found out that there are $800 billion in IRAs and some other retirement accounts, and we have the idea of letting people in middle America use the $10,000. If you take your IRA out now, you pay a big penalty. They should take it out penalty-free and ought not to pay taxes this year, but pay the taxes in 4 equal installments. And I'm working hard to get that passed. And I think that if it were to happen, there'd be a big spurt. I think the people are very nervous now about the economy. And I think if they saw some constructed plan, you see, we cannot cut taxes because we've got a budget deal. We ought to cut taxes on middle America, payroll tax, Social Security tax, tax credits. We ought to cut taxes. We can't spend any more money, like Roosevelt did in the Depression, to spend the way out of it. But here you have this $800 billion. It's our money to be spent on a rainy day. I think that's the kind of a thing an individual senator can do.
Again, looking to the future, and you hear a lot of talk from people overseas when they look at our process, like the Thomas hearings, and say, why do you people do that to yourself? You've been through a lot of hearings, the Bork hearings, the Souter hearings, the Kennedy hearings, and Scalia hearings, Rehnquist hearings, and now the Thomas hearings. Has this process benefited the democracy in this country, and do you think it will continue to be this confrontation?
Yes, it has benefited the country. The Europeans who look at it and say, why do we do this to ourselves? Their system is not all that terrific. Our system is better than theirs. If you want to take foibles piece for piece, Churchill said it best, democracy is a terrible system except compared to all the others. And you can take the British to democracy. Our confirmation process, we had Justice Scalia up. He answered hardly any questions. Senator DeConcini and I were in the process of forming a resolution to define what nominees had to answer to be confirmed. And then Judge Bork's hearing came up, and he had a kind of a background which made the answering inevitable. I have said and believe that these nominees answer just as many questions as they have to be confirmed. I could give you the details on Chief Justice Rehnquist or Judge Bork or Justice Souter, who didn't answer very many because he was so secure, or Justice Thomas, who had to answer more questions. I think it is desirable. I think there are problems, but it's an improvement. I think the Senate may be moving more to asserting more authority. Many people don't know that when the Constitution was drafted, that the original draft, an early draft, said the Senate should pick Supreme Court justices. And there's a question as to what the balance is. But I think it's healthy to ask the questions. It gets a little unpleasant at times. A lot of stuff spills out. But overall, it's better than if you keep it secret.
Have you any desire to be a Supreme Court justice?
I might someday when I get old enough.
What would you say, and we keep hearing this out of the court, that since the Bork hearings, the justices have grown chilly toward the idea of putting their oral arguments on television because they thought this turned into being a circus here. What would you say to them if they told you that directly?
Oh, well, I would say that they were very interested in putting their oral arguments on television before the Bork hearings.
But why the change? Is it fair?
I'm just joking with you.
Yeah.
They never wanted to put their oral arguments on television. I think it's a big fat excuse. I don't think that that's a reason at all. They're doing television experimentation in a lot of federal courts. I think the Supreme Court ought to be on television. But it's their own idiosyncrasy, and they can control it. They didn't like being witnesses. Chief Justice Rehnquist didn't like being a witness, came within a hair's breadth, I'm told, of not appearing because he was a sitting justice, but they may not like to appear before senators, but that's a lame excuse for not putting their own proceedings on hearings. They can regulate it themselves. They're not going to have any lawyers run wild. That presiding judge has a big gavel.
Does the Senate and the House have any way to force them to become more public, or is the separation of powers prevent that?
Absolutely no way to force them to do anything, nor should we have any. The only influence we have once they are confirmed is the power of impeachment, and it's this big.
Last question. If for some reason or other you find yourself not in the Senate any longer, what are your own dreams about other things you'd like to do?
Practice law, teach, write, read, relax, run again.
Senator Specter, thank you for joining us.
Nice being with you. Thank you.